everybody, and welcome back. Episode 3 of 4 with the phenomenal Catherine Murnan over here from Northern Ireland, author of Wisdom of Wellbeing. So much to talk about. We talked about community in episode 1. We talked about creativity with purpose here in episode 2. And now we're going to talk a little bit about resiliency. And one of the things we've talked about before is how much I hate buzzwords.
You do.
I can't stand them, right? Everyone just says, like, it's be happy or be resilient or be kind or be this. And everyone's telling you what you're supposed to be with no context. It's almost disingenuous. But let's talk about the reality of resiliency, because the world is, I mean, my forte is the world is changing faster than we can adapt, and, you know, it requires resiliency every day, and some kind of resiliency, for lack of a better word. We have to be tough. We have to roll with the punches. We have to kind of adapt with kids or with work or community or whatever it is. Like, there's always something that's going to kind of smack us across the face. Your forte, my forte is change. How do you prepare for change when you don't know what change is coming? Your forte is well-being, right? And the two of them match, of course, incredibly well.
You do.
Right? Because you're an individual who, like, ultimately macro change requires a focus on micro individual, right? Yeah. You as a person, you're the one constant for all kinds of change. I guess we'll start with, how do you define resiliency, and how do you think about resiliency, and why is that important?
So I do actually like the word.
Well, I don't know if there's a better word than resiliency, right?
Yeah.
And I guess going back to, you know, we like the words happiness, or we like the words this, but what does it mean to you? Like, resiliency, there's a toughness to it, right?
Yeah.
It's grit, or it's, you know, getting back off. And there may not be a better word.
Yeah.
I don't think I dislike the word. I dislike that everybody uses it so freely.
Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, I know. And that instructional bit, which really irks me as well, the be resilient. I suppose I'm trying to think about, because I have used the language and the concept when my children were growing up, because I was really aware that even as they were growing up, the world was changing. And this is like, my children are almost 20, 23, 26 now. But even then, there was a change in kind of gaming and technology and how school looked and the wider community and stuff as well. So I would have talked to them about resilience in terms of life will give you some challenges, it will give you some knocks, but it's how you actually kind of bounce back from those, but not in a way that's just, oh, something happens and you're straight back to the way you were again. But how can you have those conversations to maybe experience, well, that was tough. How did that make me feel? Is there ways that we can actually build better practice so that if this happens again, I'm more prepared for it? And also to convey that message that life can be really hard sometimes. It's not, for most people, a sailing through of everything being perfect. And the ability to be a bit battered and bruised and come out standing is what shapes you as a person. So for me, I suppose it is a bit gritty. It is a bit looking into yourself to see what skills, what strength you actually have, and not looking to other people to fix that. But I think if you have that capacity to understand that you will be knocked down at times, how you can bounce back up again in a way that's right for you. But ultimately then there will be a network out there if you created that sense of space and that sense of community. So
you got community, and you've got pillars of wellness, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like some people just get knocked down way more than other people.
Yeah,
it's almost unfair.
So true.
And so maybe my challenge with the fleeting word of resiliency is that it doesn't appreciate the fact that people are getting battered and bruised in like these ridiculous types of ways. But then I also kind of think people think they're being battered and bruised, and they really just need to kind of buck up a little bit. Like, what's your balance, or what's your thought on people are just getting too soft?
Yeah.
Or some people are really dealing with, you know, some shit?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly two extremes there, because going back to the conversations we've had in other episodes around the inequality piece, where if you are, and I know some of these people because I've worked with them through previous roles before I set up the business. So for an example, someone who's maybe living in poverty, they're maybe living in a domestic violence situation, they've maybe had their children taken into care, they are struggling to find somewhere they can actually live, to get an address, to get onto some sort of either a benefits pathway or back into employment. to tell that person to be resilient, to step up, man up or whatever, that's not helpful.
Right.
To create a space where that person will have a support network, be able to talk about where they want to go, take small steps to build the good habits towards reaching those really tiny goals that will hopefully come into something really positive is brilliant. But the other side of that is, the kind of ego-driven, sometimes victim mentality, or people just expecting that life will be so smooth that when they get a small bump in the road, it's a dramatic thing that everything has gone wrong. And I do know people like that as well.
I know a lot of people like that.
I guess
I'm not going to say who they are.
When it happens in a coaching context, it's quite nice because they've signed up to the coaching agreement to be able to be challenged.
I can tell you, I have allowed. Yes.
And okay, well, why? And come up with some answers. And then I suppose there's others like, in our own family network where maybe things haven't gone to plan, or someone has gone down a different path, or someone has had grief because they've lost someone they loved, or there's been mental health challenges or financial problems or whatever. And that's where it all comes back to those conversations we've had right throughout belonging and community, because if you're experiencing those challenges, your ability to dig deep, your ability to find the strength to come back out and adapt and move more fluidly, ultimately, I think comes from how you've been brought up, how you've been supported, how you've been conditioned to have a kind of a growth mindset rather than being fixed and stuck and have that ego.
I think some people, it's not about telling people to be resilient. I think some people are just born into the need to be resilient, right? Like if you're dealing with all of those things that you talked about before, right? I can't find a home, I can't do this, I can't do that, right? That you're just forced to find some kind of resiliency, right? And whether it's not about just telling people what to do. And then other people, if you're telling someone to be resilient, I feel like what you're telling them is just change your perspective because you've got like your core needs met, right? How about now grief from loss or something like that is a little bit different, right? And how do you do that? So how much of this is perspective and changing mindset, which is another term I don't like, but there's a lot of things I don't like, Catherine. Because you can't just flip a switch like, I'm going to change my mindset and I'm going to look at the positive and every cloud has a silver lining. It doesn't work that way. But how much of it is, just get off your ass and stop whining. Yeah. And then there's another side of it that says, how can I support you in a different way, right? Yeah. Maybe my challenge is that people like to be right and like to preach and like to just tell you with no context on what you're supposed to be doing versus actually doing something that's helpful to you. Yeah. What's your perspective on that?
There's two things in there for me. One is the curiosity and the questions to actually get to the root cause of what's actually going on. And like you said there, I have seen people in really adverse circumstances who are resilient because they want more. They know that unless they take action and they put the work in, that they're not going to get out of this space. And they're the people that I would always use as examples of true grit, that inner strength, that ability to kind of affect change and be really adaptable. I also think a lot of this stuff should be taught in schools from an early age because, and I've been there as a parent, where you nearly don't want your children to fail. So you kind of, even you get a prize if you've come like 30th out of 30th because it's still a certificate. Right. But you have to get out there, you have to fail to succeed and think about it less as failure or more as learning as well. And I think if you don't start having those conversations at an early stage and create, I suppose, an expectation that life is amazing, it is a gift, but there will be some crap along the way. And here's the skill set that you will need to actually deal with that. By the time you come to be like an adolescent and then some of that stuff's actually fired at you, you don't know where to go with that. And that's often where people implode. And there's a reason why the snowflake generation is being described at the moment. And I'm saying that as a stereotypical thing because I know a lot of amazing young women and men who are doing fantastic stuff. But I also know a lot who at the first sign of any mild drama or stress, oh my God, I can't do this. The world is over. What am I going to do?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. They can't face any kind of adversity.
Yeah.
When I was sitting thinking about what do I care about? Right. One of the first thing you write about is like your kids. You're like, well, what do I care about my kids? Like everybody cares about their kids. Or I want them to be, I want them to be tough. I want them to be independent. Like, well, how do I do that? Yeah. Do you think people have to put themselves in difficult situations so that they can learn adversity, right? I feel like resiliency or responding to adversity, it's an emotional challenge. Yeah. It's not a logical one.
Yeah.
And it's one that I'm not saying we should look for adversity, or maybe we should. Maybe we should put ourselves out there as part of that creativity discussion on how do you create something that could be rejected by the world, and how do you put something out there? There is so much anxiety with that, and how do you respond to anxiety? Or maybe anxiety is the word, not adversity.
Yeah.
All of these types of things. But I feel like all of it's emotional.
Yeah.
And how do you teach that if you aren't experiencing it from a realistic way? Like, I could tell you how to be resilient.
Yeah.
But until you feel the need to be it, it almost kind of flows completely, just past you. How do you encourage parents to put children in adverse situations? How do you kind of learn that emotional ability?
Yeah. And I think for me, that's one of the powers of the well-being message in a way that isn't fluffy, because as human beings, our minds and bodies are connected. And I think some people don't appreciate that. And often when they respond to things, they're not aware of what is actually going on in our systems. So our nervous systems govern all of that in terms of, our emotions, our responses, our reactions to things. And I think if you've not been taught how to notice when something goes on in here, how is that affecting the rest of your kind of decision making, your responses, creating that anxiety, that fear, that overwhelm, it's very easy to go into that default mode of thinking, oh my God, this is all, really bad and life's awful and I've nowhere to go with all of this. I do feel that if you're living the best life that you can with the gifts that you have, you're going to experience adversity, because that's just life. If you're out of your comfort zone, if you're living the experiences that are helping you to grow, challenging you, that's not always going to go right. You're going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to have failure. You're going to have times where you think this is really, really bad. And it's only through that then you will actually understand later on. You might not at the time if you're not connecting with your emotions or that response, but it's only afterwards you'll think back and go, right, that happened. This is what the way I reacted or the way I responded. And there's what the outcome was. So I know I can do that again. Or on the other side, oh God, that's the way I reacted and responded. I know I'm not never going to do that again. But how do you know that if people aren't having those conversations? And I suppose an example of this recently was in a senior leadership program with a huge public health structure in Northern Ireland. And we were chatting about stress, burnout and all of that. And I just let the conversations happen because it was so apparent and visible that these people who were talking about stress levels, burnout, feeling overwhelmed, lack of resilience, all of those things, were not aware of the narrative they were telling themselves or the way that they were actually responding to situations and the impact that was having on their ability to be resilient and bounce back up again. So if they are the leaders and they're not practicing that and not aware of how their nervous system and that impact is having on other people, how then are they expecting their teams to stand up and show up then as well?
Right. How do you expect someone else to do it? One of the things you said, like living your best life, takes two things. One is the narrative on what we're telling ourselves, like being impeccable with the word, not the words we give other people, but the words we tell ourselves in terms of what are the expectations of us and everything else. But I think when we're talking about resiliency, living your best life means you're taking a lot of emotional risks, right? Because risk and reward, that's just kind of how it goes. And when we get into these ruts, it's like a record going around and you're doing things that you're supposed to be doing. You're going to work and eat your cheese sandwich in a cubicle and you're doing this and you're supposed to be this magic parent. You're supposed to do all these things. But living your best life is when you can kind of scratch that record and say, you know what, I'm going to take this small emotional risk and see what comes back. And sometimes something negative comes back and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. But oftentimes we have these big kind of expectations of, how big of a deal we are and we're going to try this thing and it's going to be this tidal wave of negativity coming towards us, and it's not. And we take this emotional risk and we say, oh, you know what, that was actually kind of nice to be creative and write a poem and put it out and it wasn't slaughtered, or I'm going to draft this article and put it out there, or be creative in some kind of way. I'm going to do some kind of emotional thing. And I think when we say things like living your best life, it's not about doing a checklist of things that you're supposed to be doing. It's finding things that are this emotional risk that you can get some kind of reward from.
And knowing why you did it, because I wrote the book because I wanted to write the book to share the stories, and the poetry was, I suppose, a therapeutic experience for me as well. I didn't think that it would never be read by anybody, but if it hadn't, Jim, I would have been okay with that as well. And I guess that's what it comes back to. We are such a small speck on this earth.
Yeah.
And sometimes we think we're amazing.
I know.
And that we are, the be all and end all to everybody. And I laugh sometimes, and there's no judgment here. It does make me laugh where, some people come onto LinkedIn and say, oh gosh, I know I haven't been here for a while. I'm sure you've missed me. And I'm thinking,
I don't even know who you are.
Because nobody misses anybody that much.
Yes.
You miss the people you love because they're part of it. But I think sometimes we take ourselves so seriously. We think that we are so important in other people's worlds. Like even from a business perspective, I know I'm very happy how the Wellbeing Pathway is going at the moment, but I'm not naive enough to think that, that could change tomorrow, next week or whatever. But that's okay, because I'll change in terms of what I need to do to keep the business going, but I'm not going to change the fundamental way that I do it or what I want to get out of it at the end of it. And I suppose that's the resilience message for me. I know that I've got the strength, the capacity, the skills, and the community around me to support me, that if things didn't work out, I can go to plan B, D, C, whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think we take ourselves so seriously, and that social media stuff often is so like we have that love hate. I'm laughing because I was, when you went out to break there, I was saying, oh gosh, we haven't had a selfie yet. We haven't had a
we got it right. We have to do all those things.
Yeah, but it's laughing sometimes. And there's the two worlds. I mean, I have the virtual world, and then I have my real world at home. And particularly, she'll probably hate me for saying this, but my middle son's girlfriend, she's so funny. She's just a really, really funny person. But she has photographs of me, and she said, I could actually kill you on social media, because if they went up there, they're so not
That's very threatening. I mean, she's not invited to Christmas dinner.
No, she's bored. But it is that reality. And I've always had those conversations with the children when they were growing up and social media was becoming a thing. If you change yourself to fit in with what the trend is, you're never going to find yourself. You have to stay true to you. Certainly grow, develop, put yourself out of your comfort zone, take the opportunities, but you still have to stay true to you, because that's where you then will be able to build that resilience when things go wrong. Whereas if you change to adapt to every single other person's perspective, their perspective will change, and then you'll have to change again. So it's kind of that groundingness, I suppose, is really important.
Yeah, you need an anchor of who you are. And it's a good point too, in terms of perspective. Like most of my clients, one of the first things we talk about is you're not going to end up destitute in the middle of a street, whatever. Like most people that we kind of work with are fine, from a corporate perspective.
Yeah.
But there's also this perspective thing when we think about resiliency. One, taking away those fears, right? There's this fear mindset of whatever it is, that's out there, and afraid of what's possible and all that. And we're, what is the cause of those types of fears? And I think there are two at the same time. We are so massively insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, you are the most important thing to you at all times, because it's your world, right? And that's it. And so how do you balance and justify your decisions based on those two things? And how do you take the most important thing, which is you, right? You can't help other people until you help yourself. There has to be some kind of healthy selfishness. We have to do all of these types of things. How do we take the most important thing, which is you, place it in the context of something where you are massively insignificant and really don't matter. Your decisions don't matter. People don't notice because their most important thing is them. But they interact at the same time too. And so I guess it's really just shifting perspective from that type of resiliency versus, really hardcore challenges that you're going through. But, one of my favorite exercises that we did when we were at Columbia was the timeline of your life. And you just go from day 0 to today. And was there a high, when you're 5 years old down to 12 years up and down, and what were your highs and what were your lows? And you find patterns and you realize some of these things are formative, but most of the things are really insignificant, right? And these things just passed, and it's kind of I don't speak to anybody from grade school. I don't really speak to anybody from high school. All of these things are just irrelevant, but they form kind of your perspective and your decisions on who you are. And I guess that's kind of just a sum up of resiliency is a lot of it is just perspective.
Yeah, and think about things that we've worried about that now we can't even remember what that was. So it's almost like that, the conversation I often have in my workplace stuff around I think it's Susan David talks about fear and courage going hand in hand. And this morning I just saw a post on social media, but it's a lady at home, Deirdre McGuire, who I follow and respect greatly. And it was like, fear is a mile wide, but an inch deep. Yeah. And that for me is really, I suppose, fundamental, because you can't experience that kind of growth and, I suppose, opportunity and the excitement of knowing what's to come, or not knowing what's to come, but that could bring you something really, really precious if you don't feel the fear. I don't like feel the fear and do it anyways, a bit cringy, but you have to be courageous, because with that courage, you will still make mistakes. You will still think, okay, the emotional response is that I won't do that again. But then you will start to build that, okay, I know I can try these things. And for me, that's fundamentally what resilience is about. Try, fail, get back up, succeed. It'll just go in a circle, and you'll get that inner strength then each time you do that.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people, when we think about fear, and the thing I give to people is incorporate, you find a root cause and you ask the 5 whys.
Yeah.
Right? Why did this happen? Because of X. Well, why did that happen? Because of that. And ultimately you get down to a root cause. And with fear, I don't think people are very quick to tell you you're afraid to fail.
Yeah.
But I don't think people are afraid to fail. I think they're afraid of what people will think when they fail. And so, like, why? Why are you afraid of public speaking? You're not afraid of, speaking in public. If I asked you to speak about knitting or whatever your hobby is, you'd be fine, right? So you're afraid of making a mistake. Why are you afraid of making a mistake? Because you're afraid you're going to be embarrassed in front of a group of people. Ultimately, you get down to the fact you're afraid of social rejection.
Yeah.
And that's why you're afraid to speak in public. And so we've got these whys in terms of fear. And when we take this why and we have this inner dialogue of why are we afraid of something, or why won't we try this, or why won't we take this emotional risk, we find it is like a mile wide and just an inch deep. It's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
We say, all right, you know what, I'm going to try this and see what comes back. And if it goes badly, then it's forgotten in a week, and you're all good.
So true. And I had I coaching myself whenever I was doing my coaching training, and we were exploring what the future looked like. And at that stage, the wellbeing pathway was already in my mind. But fear took over. Well, a bit of fear and a bit of ego. So fear, oh my God, like that. If it doesn't work, what will people think? I'll not have a job, blah, blah, blah. But also ego, because I've been offered a director level role in a big organisation in Northern Ireland, which I kind of thought, right, that's where I want to be. And at the time, my gut was telling me not to do it. And I did. And then the courage to keep the movement going for the wellbeing pathway just grew and grew. And then that's where I went. So I know when I'm facilitating these conversations with other people that other things can take over, but you just have to listen to that gut instinct and have that belief in yourself as well, because the fear, it's again how we're hardwired, kind of that threat and keeping us safe will always be there, but it's how you can kind of bring that courage in alongside too.
There you go. Courage and resiliency. That's the story of the day.
so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's cool. You're the most important thing and the most insignificant thing at the same time. Something to noodle as you get philosophical. And we all create our kind of personal philosophies. So that's episode 3 on resiliency. Stay tuned for more. We have a 4th. Let's talk about technology and how this impacts our community, our resiliency, our well-being, and all of those types of things. It'll be a nice sum up. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you in just a few.